maybe we can do it to check, but
You don't have to if you don't
I
want.
don't necessarily need to hear myself.
Can you hear yourself?
Yeah, and if I sit back here and relax, it's still
Yeah, you can relax, but just
Clear
make
enough,
sure
huh?
that it's a bit closer
Yeah.
to your mouth. You know.
like that.
Yeah, yeah.
All right, good. I'll just put my phone on quiet.
Yeah, it's okay. You can receive a call. You know, it's no problem. You can just
Yeah.
talk to somebody. Okay.
Nice.
So we have about 50 minutes, right?
Yeah, whatever you need.
Yeah, I know you're a very busy person in general, and you have school afterwards, right? Is that true?
I have. I don't have to teach today, but we have the intercultural learning lab.
Oh, what is that?
That's a thing that's a course that's being offered to teachers at Hanze, not just in international communication.
Is it voluntarily or you have to take it?
I think initially it's voluntarily, but basically we're all being put on that for at time to time. Like I'm getting hours for it. It's part of my package for this year.
What is it about?
It's you know what we did in ICC, like in the first year. So you know cultural dimensions and Hofstede and all that stuff.
yes.
And basically understanding intercultural sensitivity and that kind of
Yeah,
stuff.
different culture, how different cultures kind of can conflict with each other and stuff like that.
Yeah, or kind of more just exploring the nature and the strong influence of one's cultural background, I guess, and like the complicated aspect of that and the different theories about it and that kind of thing. And it's basically that same course, but then for teachers all over Hanze, because Hanze is, you know, quite international anyway and wanting to internationalize even more. So this course is being offered by people from IBS, from the International Business School.
Are they the ones that are teaching it?
Yeah, they're teaching it. And basically I'm taking it now at the same time as Peter Swielinga and Cor and Lumi and several other people as well, Oksana. And we're all taking this course, and it's every month for an afternoon. So we have to do that.
Interesting, because we're doing also the same kind of similar thing. I think as students as well. We have during our skills, we have also this cases that we have to go through where they describe a kind of a conflict that occurred, and we have to try to resolve it, but by trying to understand the difference between cultures and how one person from one culture might perceive a certain situation differently compared to someone else from a different culture.
Yeah, exactly.
Is that similar to what you guys?
It's pretty similar. Yeah, I'm just going to put this out because it's making a noise.
No worries.
There we go. Yeah, it's pretty similar in that we're looking at some of the same theories, and it's funny because it's like some of us actually teach this, but you know, it's good to do this, right? This is basically. As a teacher at Hanze, you are given hours and space and required to be kind of training yourself all the time as well. And this is part of that. So this is basically, you know, advancing our understanding of these things. But it's basically the same idea. It's looking at what have theorists said about culture. And this notion, I don't know if you remember it, but there's this idea of kind of a scale of different levels of intercultural understanding. And
yes, first is denial.
Exactly.
Then there is 5 steps. I don't know if I can recall all 5, but I know it starts with denial. And you know, I personally, I think it's great that Hanze is trying to kind of come to some kind of a solution between like regulating the communication between different cultures and trying to avoid conflict, because we've seen. In America, for example, we've seen there is a bunch of conflict going on in college campuses, you know, in terms of even racial conflict, or some people think that a certain ideology should be applied to universities where there shouldn't be like certain freedoms, for example, you know, and others think, no, university is a place of free thought and free speech, and even if it's offensive, you know, stuff like this. Yeah. And of course, it's like a really charged topic right now, and I think it's a good attempt by Hanze to try to regulate that.
And I mean, if we're teaching international communication, I mean, you know, you've got like it's a pretty important part of it, and it's trying to acknowledge and trying to understand what experts have theorized about regarding that, and you know, because on one hand, like you say, like one of the steps is denial, like. No, everyone is the same. There is no such thing as cultural influence.
There is minimization, I think.
Minimalization, yeah, that's the kind of the next one. It's kind of the idea if it's kind of benign. It's like, oh, you know what, deep down,
we're all the same.
We're all the same, which is, of course, a good approach to have.
Right.
But it's not quite as simple as that. And then, you know, so you also have the the opposite, which is like we're all completely different, and therefore you can take that the wrong way, and you can turn that into, because we're culturally different, I am superior due to my culture. And of course, that's not the idea of it. But it's trying to find a balance somewhere of acknowledging that sometimes you can have miscommunication. Often you can have miscommunication, misunderstanding, offense, conflict, whatever, due to above the surface seemingly finding clashes, which are caused by misunderstandings below the surface that we find difficult to identify, and that's what we're trying to look at, basically.
Yeah, and I think it's very good, but also I have a little bit of a I guess a little bit of an issue with this 5-step thing, because I think, like, if I already took this test, but I think
you took the IDI?
Yeah.
I just took it as well.
We're actually we're required to take it.
Yeah, me too, as part of this course.
So we're not so different after all.
Mm-hmm.
But the thing is, like, if you believe in and I wasn't planning to talk about this, but this is very interesting. If you believe in like a underlying universal ethic for everybody, right? Like something like, for example, if you're religious, right?
Right.
So then you believe that there is like such thing as divine individual, and there is such thing as a human soul, maybe, or whatever, however you wanna name those things, you know. And then you see that the view that there are different cultures, and that there is nothing. There is certain opinions that one culture will have opinion A and one culture have opinion B, and they will always conflict because there is nothing that they have in common, and then you somehow have to bridge that gap. This is something that I disagree with. You know, I think the bottom line is that we do still have something in common. Otherwise, I wouldn't have such a good and fun time talking to you, for example. You know, we're from completely different cultures. Thankfully, we speak the same language, but still we're managing to have the conversation.
And maybe that is because we're used to now like an environment where we're thinking about this stuff and trying to, you know, there's a reason you decided to study abroad and do international communication, right? Yeah. Like you're already in a particular kind of place where you're interested in looking outside of your own bubble, as it were.
Yeah, and I think it's very, very interesting to me. I personally learned a lot about it, and I think my fundamental point of view, and I don't know if you will agree, is that it's kind of a wrong thing to do, to look at the world as a place where there are different groups, where there is, you know, ethnic groups or whatever, gender groups, because I think as soon as you take this position of seeing the world as just a place where there are different groups exist,
compartmentalized,
then you obviously have to accept that those groups will compete and will have to fight each other.
Right. But then the other side,
and the other side would be looking at it as a place of more individual, like taking individual as the base. You know?
And so what we're looking at here is the difference between how you would like it to be ideally. Like ideally, we should all look at it that way, as like you are an individual and want to be open to understand you, the person.
That's right.
And that's of course what we're trying to get to. But in order to do that, it's also important to be willing to see where a conflict is coming from, so that you can try and avoid it or mitigate it exactly as much as possible. So, you know, the minimization step in the scale. I'm saying this because I'm just learning. My outcome for the IDI was that I was somewhere right in the middle. In like step 3, I think, which is somewhere between minimization.
I think I'm even lower than that. Yeah, and you're more
like
open.
There's a difference between your perceived step and the actual one, right? Like they have this kind of and I was somewhere close to between minimization and that, because of the same idea that I think that deep down, you know, we're all the same, and I believe in this idea of everybody should be able to understand each other, etc. But yeah, that's. The downside of that is that you are not seeing something, which means can then in a sense lead to miscommunication again. So like being aware of potential differences doesn't necessarily mean thinking those differences are just, that's the way it is, so we don't have to try anymore. Right? Like that's the thing. You need to be able to see where things are going so that you can work with them.
Bottom line is always good to think about stuff like this, and I think it's definitely something that is of benefit for both the teachers and the students. So you know, I'm not very mad, although I did have to pay like, what was it, 11 euros for that IDI
to do the IDI?
Yeah.
Oh, really?
I had to buy a voucher and everything. I don't know. Yeah. Anyways, so. I mean, I haven't really introduced you, but
right.
We started off. I love the flow how we started, but One thing that is very interesting, because of course you was in the past my English teacher, I believe, right? But you also do teach tools, which is I guess how would you describe it, like
it's more practical. It's
like
basically
really
the
about
Adobe suite.
learning about
and
like a
couple
certain
other things.
skills, like
Yeah.
editing or online portfolio.
Yeah. So we call them skills and tools, and so I taught you skills first. Skills being communication skills, so writing and speaking, etc., and tools being learning how to use the tools that you can make use of for communication.
Yeah,
like
exactly.
Photoshop.
And
Word.
it's interesting that you actually, I think from my research, I don't know if this is correct. Correct me if I'm wrong, but you did you have a bachelor and master's in American Studies.
That's right.
Which university did you do that in?
At the University of Groningen.
University of the Ruhr.
The Ruhr. Yeah.
So how come American Studies for a man who is from Liverpool originally?
I thought it was interesting. At the time, I was done with school and I was living here, and I can't even really remember why, but I just didn't really think about going somewhere else for university, like within the country or far away. Like I had friends here, a lot of whom were staying, relationship and things like that. So
when did you move here?
I moved here when I was 7 with my family. So I've lived here for most of my life, actually.
Right. This is your home.
Yeah, this is my home for sure.
Okay.
And so I looked at what the Ruhr had, and I was looking through the list of things. You know, there are certain things I wouldn't be able to do because I hadn't focused on them in high school. You know, I specialized in other directions, so I wasn't going to suddenly study advanced physics or something.
No.
But like, I was just looking down the list, and American Studies just kind of struck me. It's an interesting. I don't know what it's like now because when I did it was the first year. I think it was the first ever year where it was a full bachelor program. Before that, it was like a specialization. So it's changed a lot since I did it because it was I was like the first round.
What did you learn about? I mean, American culture is such a huge thing. I guess.
It's basically looking at it kind of from many different sides, but in that for that reason, right? It's like it's a culturally dominant. Place at the moment in popular culture and in the world. You know, it's very influential. But also, it's quite a young country with a very interesting aspect where it's like it was kind of very explicitly started with intentions, and these intentions are written down, right? So you've got a country that's barely, what was it, 1776? So,
I think so. Don't ask me about American history.
200 and a bit years old as a country. Obviously, it's not as if suddenly there was nothing there before that. I mean, there's a whole history of it before that, which of course we learned as well.
Yeah.
But the USA, as it is right now, is a 200-year-old country, and it's, we have documents, and the whole country is built on those documents. The the Constitution, the Bill of Rights, the Declaration of Independence, and all of that. So it's interesting to look at that and say, okay, so they started this country with this idea. How has that gone? And you can look at that quite nicely because it's recent history, so you can kind of follow how it went.
It's well documented.
Yeah, so it's an interesting case study in a way. But basically, the American Studies, when I did it, was a combination of history, literature, popular culture, cultural theory, especially cultural theory. So not so much what we're talking about or what we were just talking about, but cultural theory kind of more on a level of things
did
like
you talk
Marxism
about,
and stuff like that.
Oh, even that?
Yeah.
What about, did you talk about Cold War at all?
Yeah, for sure, yeah.
You did?
Yeah. No, I mean, looking at the Cold War in the context of where does this fit in the American, I guess, story. It wasn't just focused on the USA, by the way. I mean, it's, in a sense, you could call it North American studies because there was, it took into account Mexico and Canada, especially in the history before the USA, right? So the colonial history. I mean, you wouldn't. It would be artificial to suddenly stop at what was going to become the USA, right? You can't disregard the British colonies in the north if you're looking at the British colonies in the south. Right? It doesn't make any sense.
It certainly didn't start in a vacuum. There were other forces involved. But it's interesting that you mentioned, America is, or USA, should I say, is such a young country compared to Europe, and yet, like I, for example, never went to America. I never went to that continent. I've never been there. I want to go there, but I've never been. And yet, I feel like half of my life is already spent in America.
Yeah.
You know, it's
'Cause it's-
really crazy. Like all the thing that I have on my phone, all the thing that I spent
Your phone
hours.
itself.
But throughout my day, you know, I spent hours and hours like listening to podcasts or
Mhm.
listening to news and to daily shows and to stuff like this, even to comedy shows. And all of that, the majority of it, 90% of it, is made in not even one country but one city, right, in Los Angeles.
Right,
like,
right.
all
So
of it,
much. Yeah.
and it's crazy how this American culture is. Well, I think virus is a bad word, but it's like
Yeah.
it's
viral.
a good, it's viral, exactly, and it really with technology it spreads in seconds, and whatever happens. I mean, we all know of all these controversies that are only relevant really to America, like
Right. We all get, well, all. It seems in my immediate surrounding anyway, like we follow American politics as if it's our politics.
Yeah, exactly.
It's more exciting to me to follow American politics than Dutch politics.
Because it is exciting,
Yeah.
right? And it's crazy how exciting it is. It's like a theatrical drama and
not just since Trump. I mean, before that too.
Yeah. Although Trump brought just it to another level, you know.
Yeah.
I think
slightly more infuriating level, but yeah, for sure.
Yeah, and I love following it, but it also makes me think, like, are we coming? Do you think we're coming to like a more global, not government, but a global centralized society that everybody in the world is now paying attention to one culture, and it's kind of taking over the rest of the world with the help of the technology that we have?
Well, I mean, I think we can't really deny that, you know. With sort of the popular discourse, the generalized kind of discussion that we're having, and clashes that are occurring all the time are to do with the world suddenly communicating in this one place online, right? And that's definitely a thing. But I guess maybe you could look at it as pre-internet and post-internet, because of course pre-internet, the US began influencing global popular culture pretty much since the Second World War, right? So
by other means, like music or
Disneyfication,
right?
Music, Hollywood, fast food, you know, fashion, right? Like we all wear, like a sweater is not necessarily an American thing, but like you're wearing jeans right now, that's an American thing, right? Like, and we consider that to be the most normal thing in the world, but you know.
So it's not just the fault of internet. It started way before that.
Yeah, but I think then the internet is actually bringing a new version, an interesting new twist to it, because it's no longer kind of who can dominate. Like the American popular culture dominated because somehow their for example, their movie industry just got there first or has more money or whatever it is. I mean, you know,
there's a lot of
people have
factors.
studied this and I could say much more clearly what happened there, but it became the dominating force, right? Like Dutch movies don't have as much of an influence on the world as an American movie does, right?
Yeah.
And therefore also English as a language, and that's partly also related to empire aspects from the past as well. But so you know they played a big role there anyway. But now everyone's talking on the internet. Okay, maybe English is still a thing, but other than that, you're seeing that there's a kind of counter force, and maybe that's where you're getting these clashes. You know, that it's not just America that is able to decide the discourse of
and actually
internet.
it's an interesting fact that I heard somewhere that the majority of people who speak English are not even from like England, Europe, or America. They're like Indian, you know. There's like a billion of them, and then they like majority speak English. So it's crazy. I watched this interview with Jack Dorsey, who is like a CEO of Twitter, I think. And, and he came on and he talked about how Twitter is really a global platform. He said, you know, and that there are problems that are so emphasized in the media in regards to American culture, you know, and that has to do with Twitter. And he's like, look, like I as a CEO have to say that like American people are only like a percentage of all the people that use Twitter, you know. So it's really getting kind of crazy for those people who founded those social media platforms like Twitter. And another thing he said that I think was really interesting is he said that something like Twitter it can't really be uninvented, and it's not that it was even invented, it was more discovered, you know. It's like humanity discovered a way to communicate worldwide within seconds via text, via these hashtags and all these tools. And once it's discovered, now it doesn't matter if it's Twitter or you can change the name, you can change the brand, but it's really just about communication, and so no matter how things escalate, and even if it becomes kind of dangerous, I think we're destined to go down that path of globalization and of being interconnected with the rest of humanity.
And I personally think that's a good thing. Like but like any big change, social change, you're going to run into conflicts all the time, as we see, right? And so it becomes a bit. On certain days, it could be super frustrating just to read about all of the crap that's happening online, basically, and the problems that are going on there, and toxic environments that have been created, and allowing on certain like forums and that kind of stuff, like ideas to be given strength that in the past wouldn't so much, because they would have been really fringe, and you would have had to actually really be fanatic and go and meet up with some other fanatics somewhere. Whereas now you can very easily be kind of sucked into some
like
shit.
flat Earth theory.
That's an example, right? Yeah, or anti-vaxxing, or like angry anti-feminism and of course racism and whatnot.
It seems like there's a lack of common sense now.
It's like the threshold is lower. The threshold is lower for all kinds of things, good things and bad things.
Mm-hmm.
It's much easier to quickly access anything and to talk with anybody. Well, with people who you normally wouldn't have met.
Right.
And that of course has good and bad sides to it. And I think in general, like you say, like the Twitter CEO said, like you can't undo it. Mm-hmm. It's not something to be like, oh, what have we done? We must put the genie back in the bottle or something. That's not how it works.
Yeah.
It's more just like when there is a big change, there's going to be bad things that happen with it and good things in the long. We have to maybe look at it in the bigger picture. But it can also be super scary, because it's when you're aware, when something is established, when your life is kind of set and you understand how the world works and the social fabric of things, and then a big change happens. Of course, it's unnerving. And you feel like out of control,
Yeah, exactly. And I feel more and more out of control, with my phone, because it's day after day. It's more time that I spend looking at it, and it's a common problem, and I used to not think of it as a really big deal, but now if you look at it in the way that all the things, all the media platforms, all the entertainment that is existing online, it's all dependent, and kind of the money it makes is all dependent on the eyes that are watching it, right?
Yeah.
So they have to put advertisements in order for us to see it, and that way, that's how they keep themselves alive, right?
Yeah.
Like that's the industry, and the only way that they can keep it going is if people paying attention, and obviously this huge industry is it's getting better and better and better at capturing the attention of a human being, and I don't know how much time will pass before it will be so good at it that it will be difficult to not kind of to go into that world fully and forget about kind of the world without it. I don't know if you do you have any limits on how you use your phone or social media?
Obviously I try not to be glued to it all day long, but that's pretty like the newest iOS tells you your screen time every week.
Yeah,
it's like
that's a depressing thing.
Or up this many percent. Oh man, that's terrible. Average screen time of however many hours per day. But it's. I have a son. He's 2, and obviously it can be, especially if you're spending a whole day with him. It can be very tempting while he's doing things to kind of like be on your phone and keeping yourself busy. And that's for me the biggest struggle. It's like I don't want him to grow up thinking like Daddy's not looking at me half the time because he's looking at that thing in his hand. Like so there I'm kind of trying to as much as possible not do that. But on the other hand, you can't function through the day without your phone, right? It's like if I'm spending a day alone with him on Fridays, I don't work at Hanze, I'm at home with him, and I can't be like, I will look at my phone at 5:00 when the day is done, right? Because there are still things happening in your life that you need to do. Not just like, oh, I need to check Facebook. Not that, but I need to hear back from someone about what's happening later on today, or something needs to be organized for tomorrow, or there's a thing with work or whatever. And like it's what life is now. Like the same way that in the when I was growing up, it wouldn't have been weird for my parents to receive a phone call at home if they were looking after me for a day, right? Like, and I wouldn't have found that strange. Our version of that is receiving texts, and so you have to look at your phone.
Yeah, and it's crazy because the rate of change is so quick, you know, with technology. Like my dad was complaining recently. He's like, because in Moscow they implemented the system where which I think is already in place in Europe in many of the cities, where if you park your car, you know, you can kind of pay for the parking online. And like you just, I don't know, you put a code in and it just retracts the sum that you need to pay. And my dad didn't really understand all that system, and you know, he's not the best with technology, and so he was complaining how why can't I just pay cash to you know, the old way, you know, why does it have to always change? And I try to explain to him that, you know, like if you don't adapt, you kind of become outdated, you know. And
that's scary too.
It's a danger because it's like there are still a bunch of people who remember the pre-internet era, you know. There are still you do exactly. I don't remember. I remember still a time where there was like no touch screens, only like phones with buttons, you know. But it's a blurry memory because it was so long ago.
Oh,
you know?
That's so funny.
Yeah.
I remember I remember there being no internet, obviously, and definitely no mobile phones, only for, you know, Wall Street people. But like, I remember dial-up I remember getting internet for the first time, asking my parents to get internet, and have to figure out how to do this. And like, if you were on the internet, you couldn't be on the phone. And so like I'd be on the internet, and then my parents would pick up the phone, the you know, the landline, right? No mobiles. The landline, you hear this like. You'd be like, oh, you're on the internet. Stop it. You've already been on for 10 minutes. It costs you money per minute to go on the internet.
Oh,
right?
man, yeah.
You know, like there's a whole different thing. Like that was when I was like...
and it was way slower
12,
as well, right? Probably the speed.
Yeah, completely. I remember when MP3s was first a thing.
Yeah.
My first time I ever downloaded an MP3. It took like 20 minutes.
Damn.
Half an hour, download one song.
That's crazy. And now they're thinking about like making 5G internet, you know, everywhere, which is like super fast, I guess. Yeah. And it's just crazy how fast things are changing. But let's shift gears a little bit.
Yeah, you want to talk about
I still have a lot of notes that I wrote down.
Yeah.
So I want to talk about just an interesting, unique career that you have, because we already spoke about how you're from on one hand you're a teacher at Hanze and you're teaching English, obviously, and you did American studies, but then on the other hand you have an interesting career in comedy. You do comedy, and that is something also that takes I think some of your time.
Yeah, it does.
Yeah, and for me, because I'm looking at myself and I'm a student now, I'm studying, obviously, so there is not much of a certainty for me in the future yet.
Right.
Kind of everything seems a little misty, a little uncertain, and usually the picture in my head, the normal picture that I get is, you know, I will probably have a job if I be smart, and if I work, and then that job will provide me with income for me and for my family if I'll have a family. And that will that's how majority, I think, of the people exist, right?
Yeah.
And I never thought about kind of diversifying your income, but also just the way you spend your day. So can you just tell me how did you end up like going into comedy?
Well, basically, I mean, how I ended up going into comedy was when I was a student, I was doing theatre. So my dad always did amateur theatre when I was growing up, and I was sometimes in plays that he was doing with this English theatre group in Assen called the Namateurs, related to the NAM. My dad didn't work for the NAM, but that was like an English community, the NAM being the gas company, Shell, here in the north. Right now, they're quite a controversial company because of all the earthquakes and stuff.
Yeah.
But they had, I don't know if it still exists, they had an English amateur theatre company. My dad used to play there, so I was used to kind of the idea of doing plays is fun. And then as a student, I joined GUTS, English student theatre group, and I was in some plays. And then eventually, I was done studying, and some of my friends from GUTS wanted to continue doing stage things, but we wanted to try doing improv.
You created a comedy group, right? Which is called Stranger Things Have Happened. Yeah,
that's right.
I did a little bit of research about that.
2009, so 10 years in June. We did our first show.
Wow.
And that was started by some friends of mine, together with me, who we basically, we were finished with being students in student theatre, but we wanted to keep doing stuff, but in a slightly different way. So basically, it's a hobby that I've always done, theatre that is, and then improv comedy is something we taught ourselves 10 years ago. I thought it was a crazy idea because we did improvise sometimes in rehearsals as a way of kind of warming up or doing auditions or whatever. And I was always like, it's barely entertaining being in the scene, let alone watching the scene as someone who's a friend. Why would any audience want to see that? Right? It's just sloppy, bad stuff. Why would you want to do that? You want to watch a real play, right?
So you were skeptical at the beginning.
Yeah, for sure. But we had this force of nature case, a friend of ours who started this and said, I'm going to invest my money in setting up a foundation, right? We're going to do this correctly. We're going to make this professional. We're going to do this correctly. We're going to
Your website looks very professional.
Well, thanks to Thomas Moak, who's a colleague at Hanze as well, but also in Stranger Things, and he made the site. But WordPress site, by the way. We're doing WordPress right now. But so and Case basically, he'd read a lot, listened to a lot of podcasts and things like that, and decided to teach us ourselves how to do improv correctly and perform it. And luckily he was persuasive enough to get us to actually do this, and now we still do it. And so you're talking about diversifying like your career and things like that. Well, I mean, we make some money with Stranger Things, but we don't make a living. So it's a serious hobby with really nice rewards.
Okay, then
in many ways, not just money.
Let me ask you a question then. If it all of a sudden it wouldn't be fun anymore to do it, would you would stop, right?
I would, yeah, and a lot of us have. I'm Thomas, who I mentioned, and I and my wife Naomi are the only 3 people in Stranger Things who were there in the very beginning. Still, everyone else who was there at the start has moved on for various different reasons, and that's just how it goes. But I do struggle with that question. What would happen? Why would I stop this other than leaving Groningen? If we were to move away from Groningen, obviously that would be a thing, and maybe then I would try and do improv somewhere else because I love doing it. It's really fun to do. But at what point does this become a thing that you don't do anymore? I don't know. But right now, I still love it. So
I have the same kind of contemplations that I have with things that I do as well. Like even this podcast. I'm doing it because I love it, and I love talking to people, and it's one of my favorite things to do. You
had a creative idea, and you're
exactly.
I'm going to do it.
Exactly, and that's what I said. So I think as there is a lot goes. I'm sure there is a lot goes into comedy as well in terms of like planning and all the managing and all the boring stuff. All the interesting stuff. But so I always try to emphasize with this is that the thing that I'm doing this for is this moment right here, and all the planning that goes before and all the editing that goes after that. Those are all things
to make this happen
that are secondary, exactly. And this is the primary thing. Is this the same for you when you're on stage in front of people?
I love performing improv. On Friday we had a show, our monthly show, and this time I was the host, so I wasn't playing. I was just talking in between the scenes. And we were about to start the second half, and Marjolein, one of the players, said, like, "Hey, how's it going? You feeling good about it?" Because I always get nervous before I have to host. So, it's the second half. He was like, "Yeah, you feeling good?" I was like, "Yeah, of course." But I wish I could play. Like, I'm watching the scenes, and I want to enter the scenes and join in. And I'm like, because I love doing improv. So no, of course, it's all about that. But I get a lot of satisfaction out of the fact that this is a thing that we began and that we manage and we do ourselves. And I've always had a role. Almost always had a role in it, from being chairman of the foundation to being bookings, and right now I do the PR. I'm loving doing the PR, but there's a whole aspect of it, and I care a lot about Stranger Things Have Happened working and doing well, and sometimes, like especially in the past, it's been stressful. And I've often wondered, is it worth this? Worrying about how the group is doing internally. Are people happy? Are we? How can I solve things? This problem or that problem, or how can we make this grow? And it weighed quite heavily on me. And I've sort of managed to reach a place where instead I just see that as a fun challenge, and that it's ultimately about having fun on stage and enjoying it.
And I think this is like a common personality trait among creative people, where if you're not doing something then you feel like almost like a part of you is kind of slowly dying, you know, and you're watching it die every day, you know.
If you're not doing anything at all.
Yeah.
Right.
If you're just you know wasting your time or doing something that you don't really like doing, and that's how I felt at least. Is like there is this little kind of child person in my personality that is demanding to be fed through this creative approach, you know, do something, and I'm just watching it, and I always felt kind of guilty about it.
And the do-it-yourself aspect is part of that too.
So
you're doing this podcast.
Yeah,
you are also making it happen, and that is satisfactory as well.
Yeah,
right?
It is, and it kind of makes me feel like I'm at least worth like something, you know, that I'm not completely useless. But I want to talk.
That sounds so sad.
I know. But you entered the comedy through as you said, the acting path, right? Your dad was familiar with acting, and you came. But comedy is not purely acting. It's not only acting. There is also, of course, improvisation. So on the spot, kind of coming up with jokes or just material that you entertain the room with. Of course, you have to be funny, which is also not separate from acting, you know, because acting and humor is different things.
Right.
And it's this element of being live and unprepared in front of the crowd. So I just thought it's an interesting combination of all those different skills that kind of have to come together in order to have a successful set.
Yeah, so I don't do stand-up comedy. I've done it once. I did one stand-up set, partly to challenge myself. I want to know what it's like to have done this, and it was fun. But you've got to prepare stand-up because it's not improvised.
You have to write material.
You've got to write material, and you've really got to be thinking about it all the time. I maybe would like to do that again in the future, but you know what? To be fair, improv is for lazy people. It's one of the reasons why it works very well for me to do this alongside having work, having family, because we train once a week. Thursday nights we train, and then we play shows twice a month, and of course weekly we have our improv jam. Tonight I'm doing one tonight, Monday night. So it's a lot of time, but outside of that time, I don't have homework, right? You know, so I don't have to learn lines or anything like that, which is just really nice.
What do you do during training?
Anything from just hey, let's try out a new game and see what makes the game work and what we should avoid. Anything from that to really kind of sometimes really almost kind of floaty hippie-ish stuff, but really trying to find out like what makes this stuff work. So
what works and what doesn't work.
Yeah, like right now so I went to a workshop a little while back with two other people, Ola and Tim from Stranger Things, taught by two improvisers who were also trained as clowns. It was a clowning workshop. But not clowning as in like beep, beep, but like kind of the essence of clowning being how to show the basic emotions through your body language and through your expressions and making contact with the audience, a lot of eye contact. And so we're redoing that. We took, from that workshop, we took a bunch of notes, or Tim took a bunch of notes. I'm too lazy. And now Tim is teaching us that, and Ola to the rest of the group in training. And it involves exercises like standing in front of another player and looking in each other's eyes for a very long time, being as vulnerable as possible, and then trying to express a deep emotion as clearly and as kind of basically as you can. It's suddenly, super sort of, what's the word I'm looking
personal,
for?
Even.
Yeah. And so this is not how to do something on stage. This is exploring something else which will benefit ultimately what's going on stage. And that kind of stuff. So we do all kinds of different things in training. One thing, of course, we never do is plan, right? Like it definitely is improvised what we do on stage. We plan what games we're going to play, and we know how to play those games. But we don't go like, hey, today, let's do a scene about that. If we get a suggestion with this, then we're going to do this, right? Like we don't make those plans.
You don't have those plans in mind. And I think that also causes the audience to have a little bit of more respect for your performance, because they know that you can get lost at any time, because you don't have anything
it's
prepared.
Real improv. It's honest. Yeah.
Like I think once I visited your show, and you were actually asking the audience to give you kind of topics or words that you would go off based on those words that they would give you,
that's
and
how
you
we
would
do it.
do a play out of those words, and you obviously don't know what they're gonna say, so it's kind of there is like an aspect of risking failing, you know.
And actually with improv, like, it's possible to do it without getting suggestions. But it's part of the show dynamic, you know. Of course, it's nice. Yeah, and it helps you get inspiration. If someone says submarine, you're like, okay, submarine, let's go with that. But you can also start the scene just by starting. But of course, it helps that the audience knows that they've had input. It's nice to involve the audience, and it also, you know, for people who are doubting, it shows that it is real. So that's kind of the reason for suggestion giving. But yeah, it's fun. What you asked me something just now, and I think I was going somewhere with it. I can't remember what it was. About
just talking,
comedy.
Interacting with the audience.
Oh, the acting and the being funny and all that. How that works together, right?
Yeah.
So being funny in improv. So putting stand-up comedy aside for a second, because you've got to plan stand-up. Improv is about creating something together, and that's what's part of the thing. One of the things that's so fantastic about it, and actually, I really want to start doing something with it at International Communication. Okay. And there are some colleagues of mine who are kind of enthusiastic about this, but we have to look into how we would actually incorporate it. But it's actually incredibly important for communication. So for communication students, I think it's actually super beneficial, because what you're actually doing with improv is with somebody else, through communication between each other and with the audience, creating something that isn't there. And that only works if you are communicating, if you're understanding each other. So if there's a misunderstanding between each other, improv doesn't work, right?
But there will be inevitably misunderstandings. So I guess you have to just learn how to move past those little misunderstandings.
Well, yeah, and that's so the things we're talking about, like what I was just saying in the training, right? So these kind of like more basic level ideas and skills, like vulnerability and openness and eye contact. I don't know what, like tons of other things that we do, is ultimately about exploring communication. How do I communicate properly with you what I am feeling right now as a character and with the audience so that they understand what's going on without just saying it, right? So in a very when we teach the improv course at OSFA, the very basic stuff, you know, we start with make it clear within 3 lines. I say something, you respond, I say something back to you. Who we are, where we are, what's going on, right? And then we teach it in like the simplest way. So just say it out loud, right? Like, hello, Dad. So in other words, I've just told you I am son and you are dad, right? Or at least I am child. I might be your daughter, right? Because it's acting. We can be whoever we want.
Right, yeah.
But you are dad, right? And you're like, hello, son. It's like, okay. Yeah. So I'm your son. Here we are at the beach. Would you like to eat something? Right? Okay, so we've set up where we are and who we are, right?
Yeah, so the
when,
where,
yeah. But you don't want to just do it by saying stuff. In fact, it's better because no one does that in real life, right? So you don't say hello, Dad, when you're standing on the beach together. So instead, you'd want to find other ways of doing it. So, but you're creating, for example, a physical environment that doesn't exist. There's nothing on the stage. So how do you use your body language to show what's going on? How do you use your eyes and your face to give the emotion that's going on in a way that the other player doesn't misunderstand and the way the audience doesn't misunderstand? So that's one thing. And on the other hand, it's not just about sending out, it's also about receiving. Which again, for communication students, super important.
That's fascinating. Learning what is the reaction and properly responding to it
and
as well.
Accepting as well. Yeah. So if we're creating a fictional environment out of the blue, if I say, hello, Dad, you go like, I'm not your dad, right? Then the thing I was trying to create has just been destroyed by you not accepting what I just did. Yeah. Right? If I do a thing, you have to accept it. And if you do something in return, I have to accept that too. And that's the basic building blocks of an improv scene. And so when you say, you need to think about like creating funny material for the room, the responsibility is not on your shoulders to create something. Your responsibility is to be and accept and build together. To
be like a piece of this narrative. I think it's really, you're not in control of the whole narrative, but you can just contribute to it, and you have no idea what's going to come back at you, but you still have to adjust. And I think this is where there is a link between two of your professions,
Absolutely. And I didn't know this when I began, right? It's just how life goes, right? I got offered a job at Hanze School of Communication because I was a native English speaker who had done a study that involved writing and reading and whatnot. So I was able to teach writing skills, and they needed somebody quickly, right? That's how I started. So I didn't know, as an improv player, I will be really good at marrying together the idea of communication and improv. That's only something I'm kind of starting to figure out now, right? That's just how life ends up.
You end up doing
right?
something, and then only later realizing the kind of connection between those things and how they actually complement each other in a very nice way.
And finding that, looking for that, and trying to enhance it, of course.
That's really amazing.
Which is like an improv scene, right? You don't know what's going to happen, but something does, so you pick up on that and try and turn it into something cool.
Yeah, and I find this all the time with my group mates, in the during the project. I don't know what's going on. I don't know the deadlines. I don't know anything, and they're just kind of going off about the work, and I'm just trying to be that last fitting piece of the puzzle,
Right.
So I guess it's very useful. Maybe I should try this as well. Yeah. But I want to say because I don't know if you know this, but there is actually a big connection between the American podcast sphere and the comedians, because I think one of the first podcasts that was started and that really got popular, and I think now it's one of the biggest podcasts with like millions and millions downloads like a week. It's called Joe Rogan Experience,
right?
And the Joe Rogan obviously is a comedian.
He's a comedian, right? Yeah. I've never actually heard that podcast. Like I know of it and I've seen it come by. I
think everybody kind of heard like glimpses of it. But
exactly. For some reason, I've never actually checked it out. I don't know why. I just never have. I do listen to the Mark Maron podcast, which is another comedian.
Okay.
And that's fun because he sometimes he interviews anybody from Obama to.
Did he actually interview Obama?
He interviewed Obama while he was president.
Oh wow!
And that's kind of part of what made him famous.
Okay.
But actors, musicians, right? The Rolling Stones. He's interviewed tons of different people, but also just his buddies from the comedy scene. And sometimes they end up talking about that. But also, I've discovered through that one, tons of big name actors and comedians that I didn't know came from the improv world. And then they always start talking about improv, and I'm like, whoa, nice.
Yeah, and that's how I also kind of got a little bit information about the comedy in America, in Hollywood in particular, because I was just listening to this podcast because they just had general interesting topics and conversations, and then there would be these comedians coming on, and they would start kind of promoting their tours or whatever, and they start talking about like the craft of comedy, and they're mostly talking about stand-up and not improv, but regardless, it's still kind of very, very connected. And one thing I kind of quickly understood from listening to those comedians speak is that they are probably one of the they're the people that really are familiar most with the city and the nightlife of the city, because they first of all they perform in front of the people, but also they have this ability to tour throughout the country. They would go to different comedy places throughout the country and kind of go on the road, as they say. And I wanted to relay this back to you because obviously you are doing comedy in Groningen, and Groningen is a very vibrant city. And when I was researching you, I found on a website they asked you a few questions about what do you think about Groningen, what do you like most about Groningen.
Oh yeah, which site was that?
I don't exactly remember, but I think it was something like Groningen Student City. It was like one of those websites.
Sure.
And I think when I read that, I thought, well, Tom must really know a lot about like how Groningen functions when the sun goes down,
Well, yeah, maybe not so much now. I don't really get a chance to go out late at night.
Right.
Also, I can't.
Having a son and everything.
Yeah, sleep is a very valuable commodity to me now. But I used to run a monthly club night as well, drum and bass event. In the Subsonic Club before it had to close. And that's actually how I know.
Okay.
And so I was involved there a little bit. Like I knew I basically kind of knew some of the people who run some of the places. But it's such a big nightlife scene. Like there's a whole aspects of it that I know absolutely nothing about.
Yeah,
and it's a very young scene, and I'm suddenly realizing that I'm getting a bit older, right? So,
No, but it's just interesting to talk about the city in general, because I think Groningen is very unique in that sense. Like for me, it was very unique because it's, first of all, it's a very young city, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And it's true that you said that it is a like a true student city, because there are two huge universities, and without them it would be like almost like a village, without the universities. So the universities have a ton of influence on the city and the life and the lifestyle of the city.
Because I think altogether there's about 40 to 50,000 students in the city.
Which is like 40% of the population,
right? It's 200,000 people total. So, that's a huge emphasis on it. And then it's a big employer, both the university and Hanze, for me as well.
Right, yeah.
So, it has a real... And I think that combined with the fact that it's relatively... I mean, if you look at other countries, it's not. But in the Netherlands, it's relatively far away from other places.
Yeah, that's
far
true.
away being, it takes an hour to get to another city like that.
Yeah.
And in Holland, that's crazy. So for the local area, it's the center, the cultural center, which means everything that happens in this area happens in Groningen. But I mean, that's not entirely true. No offense to like Leeuwarden or Assen or places like that. But
it
is the cultural center, one of the cultural centers, the main one. And so you get this weird combination of small place where you can quickly get to know everybody.
Yeah.
But constant renewal. Every year, there's thousands and thousands and thousands of new young people arriving who want to do like what you're doing right
and
now.
Therefore,
right?
constant innovation.
You arrived in the city how long ago?
I'm just here. This is my second year.
Yeah.
In the city.
So you've barely got here, and here you are now doing this, connecting in with a studio here in the city, with creative people who set up this particular studio, right? With a new creative idea to do this podcast. There's always new stuff coming, new people with fresh ideas, basically, and that's really, really cool. So that keeps it running.
It keeps the atmosphere very, very vibrant, and there is always kind of innovation that kind of goes around the place. And
but then if it was a huge city, it would be more anonymous, and it'd be harder to connect with the people who are doing this stuff.
Okay,
there's more going on in a massive city, but it's also harder to break in, right? Whereas now you've got a lot happening. But if you know one person, suddenly half the people who are doing stuff, and that's
interesting.
That's great.
That's interesting. And also, it's kind of always changes, because like now I have next year I have to go abroad, for a month or whatever, and then so I'm gonna leave the city, and then maybe I'm gonna come back to the city. So
if you want to finish the study, you got to.
If I have to finish it,
But after that,
I have to come back. It's very very cool thing to think about. Let's talk a little bit more about your career and the different paths. Do you think that teaching English have also contributed to your ability to communicate on stage? Because I notice now that I'm talking to you, you're kind of a very quick thinker, and you're able to come up with things on the spot and kind of develop things. Is this just having English as your native language, or also learning the language?
Language-wise, I think it's probably just being a native speaker, and I don't know. I guess I would almost say that I don't really know. It's difficult to say. I would say perhaps, again, I'm always bringing it back to this, but I think improv does play a big role, mostly just in terms of feeling confident to just blab in front of people. So, but it helped me a lot in terms of teaching. I don't mind going in front of the class and just, responding and talking off the top of my head, because I've done that on stage. So that's scary. So I've learned how to deal with that, and now I can do it in front of class, and so that helps perhaps.
So you're not worried, because I spoke to Mart the first episode, and he said he's always worried at the beginning when he has a whole class of students and he has to introduce himself and talk to the students.
Really?
In that situation, you feel completely comfortable because
I realize that there's high stakes in that. First impressions are a thing, and especially with the new first year students, it's like, okay, you're going to be our students for 4 years at least. Some of you will not, but the ones who stay, who decide this is right for them, they're going to stay for a while. It's helpful if in the long run we have a good relationship, not a bad one.
That's true.
So I realize there's things going on there, but no, not really. If I know what I'm doing in the class, and so if it's something I've taught before, if I'm confident in the material that has been developed either by me or by someone else that I then have to teach, then I'm confident that I can make something of it, and I'm happy in front of that environment. It's also that I've been doing it now for a little while. At first I was much more nervous.
Yeah, and I noticed your very interesting approach to teaching, because some people, like I had an English teacher who would come in the class every day, or whenever we would have the class, and he would sit down in front of the class and like literally sit down behind the desk, and he would open his like the things he had to teach that day, and he would kind of read them out, and then he would say like, okay, now is the time for this activity, and now is the time for this activity, you know. And it was so methodical and so kind of really it felt boring, to be honest. And with you, I noticed like you can walk around the classroom a lot, and you would kind of come and make contact with different students, and that kind of adds like a little bit of energy to the class. I think I always felt that.
I mean, I know what I'm going to do in class in a very general sense. Right, I know what, in terms of like the block, what the point of this particular session is, and what I want to have covered today. But yeah, I think that it works best if you know, if it's organic. I used to make notes again when I first started, so that I wouldn't forget. And when I first started teaching, I'd be done way too early. Because you go through stuff really quickly.
Because you probably speak faster when you're nervous, right?
Yeah, but also you don't pick up on the opportunity to dwell on things and to discuss things. So because of being nervous and not experienced yet, when we do interview skills, right, in the first year, I don't know if you remember doing interview skills. It's something that you get, which you're not experiencing now because you're interviewing now, but you're allowing topics to come up and to just go there
to progress.
You're not glued to your notes.
Not necessarily.
Right. Yeah. And the same thing happened to me as a teacher at the beginning. You know, I'd just be like, okay, I need to do the next thing and the next thing. Oh, we're done. I don't know what to say now. Right.
Okay.
Whereas now I have in my head that I want to hit 3 main topics that we need to have covered, but you know, and I'm roughly aware of the timing. But we'll get there.
This is interesting because it's kind of what you touched on is when you are teaching, you know, and if you are experienced, if you already did this a lot of times and you have experience and wisdom in that sense, that you kind of pull back and instead of kind of focusing on yourself or on the plan for the lesson, you have an overview of what's going on, and that allows you to be more open. And I can make an analogy, for example, with a game like chess, you know, where you play against an opponent, and an opponent is focusing on like a particular move or a particular situation on the board. And if you are a good player, I think you will kind of see the situation as a whole battlefield, you know, and that will allow you to make better decisions and not to be as worried about a certain situation. So that's something to, I think, to mark, is that being aware of or having experience, I think, teaches you to be aware of the narrative as a whole, or the situation as a whole, and not just a specific thing within.
Yeah, the specific things are being aware that, you know, we've perhaps got off track a little bit here. We're talking too long about this or that, or this question that you have is that's true, but I'm going to talk about that in a minute, so just wait and we'll get to it, or, you know, that kind of stuff. But indeed, yeah, it's just a general overview.
And you also, I think from my research, you worked as a translator, right?
That's right. Yeah, I did. Yeah.
And how I'm assuming it was Dutch and English, right? That you were translating?
Dutch and English. Yeah. I don't speak any other language enough to be able to do that. Yeah.
What other language do you?
I can get by in Germany, as in I can read signs and I can order things, and you know, I get very self-conscious, so I don't do it so much. But you know, I have a rough idea. I learned French in school, but that would be a real issue if I wouldn't. I did my study abroad in Montreal, and I was quite surprised at how I could still read signs. I could understand what things said.
In French?
Yeah, in French. But I couldn't understand what people said. But this was Montreal, right? Québécois is a whole thing. You know, it's a whole different kind of French. That was just impossible.
But did you have to translate just like person-to-person conversation, or just documents?
Documents. It was always written, on the spot interpretation. So translating on the spot is being an interpreter. I've never done that. I've done it casually perhaps, but never. Yeah, it's very difficult. But written translation, from fun things to really, really boring things. And I did it at a company for a while, a localization company. So localizing is basically, you know, you have this program, this software, whatever it might be, a website, and it needs to be localized for the place where it's going to. So we need a Dutch version to be made, and so that would be stuff like Google and Apple and Microsoft and things like that. But mostly dull things like if a new software release, an update, right? There needs to be somewhere a documentation for people who need to know this, of all the very minute stuff that's been updated using language that I don't understand, just boring terminology, coding stuff, that kind of thing. And I would have to translate that according to a particular set terminology set. And yeah, different companies would have different ways of saying things, different conventions, and you had to learn that. But you have software that helps you, not like Google Translate, but translation programs where you basically have the text on one side and then you fill in the text line by line on the other side. But it gives a suggestion based on what you've translated before, and that helps you remember how you said it last time, so that the terminology is consistent.
Right. So you don't use the word, like new word every sentence.
So yeah, like a style guide in a way. But yeah, to be fair with you, I find that really, really boring work. Well, it was good. It made me, I earned a living with it. I did it as a freelancer as well. And I kept doing it as a freelancer after I started at Hanze, because I started at Hanze like 1 day a week, and then 2 days a week, and then 3 days. And then it grew and grew and grew. And then suddenly I realized I'm making a full-time salary with this now. I don't need to, I don't need to do translations anymore for the money.
Yeah.
So why am I doing it? Because I don't like spending my time this way. So then I kind of stopped doing it.
So as soon as you were able to be independent financially, without it, you dropped it.
Yeah. I don't mean to be super negative about translation. It's
No.
I did have fun time. It also gave me access to interesting things as well, and I've translated some really interesting documents.
Those internal Google documents,
Yeah, well, that was a little bit more dull, but I've translated like websites and brochures for things that I therefore learned about as well.
Yeah.
I also translated some pretty funny stuff. I had to do sex shop catalogs.
That's a real bitch to translate.
That was like how many different words can you find, different ways of describing this feels good. This toy feels good. Like, how do you describe that in different words? Like, so I found myself, I'm like, this is a thing I'm doing now. Yep, this is my life right now. I'm translating this.
Sometimes when you have to make bread, you go in that.
You do really weird things, yeah. Well, but generally speaking, teaching is way more fun.
What is more fun for you now, teaching or comedy?
Oh, I do comedy for fun. I do teaching for a living. So there's a thing there. But thankfully, I have come to enjoy the thing that I do for a living, which is, what we can hope for, right? That's the best we can hope for. That you first of all, to get something that can make you a living, that makes you very lucky. And
I think it's very rare, right?
If you find that you enjoy the thing you do for a living, then you're really lucky.
I think that's really rare. Like, that's what my dad was always saying, because he doesn't enjoy his job,
Right.
And I mean, there are parts of it maybe he does enjoy, but overall it's a stressful thing.
Look, I don't like grading, okay, and not many teachers do.
Thank you for being honest.
I don't like doing grading. It's that feels like work. I enjoy teaching depending on the class, not the people, but the course and the topic of that day, especially if it's something that I get to teach as the only one, so I get to decide how we're going to do it. So I think that's one of the things that's been found, and there have been studies into this, not that I've read personally, but I've been told, of job satisfaction is so much tied to autonomy. So
if you're independent?
Yeah, if you can determine how you do the job. And so you're lucky if you have a job where you're getting paid, excuse me, you're getting paid for the outcome, not for the process. So, right, like if you, when I was in school, I worked at a supermarket, and I sat at the cash till, and
you were getting paid for the process.
Yeah, you were getting paid by the hour,
and
you have to be there, and and that's the thing. It's not fun, right? If you're getting trusted with it's your job to be there when classes happen and teach the material. How you teach that material is up to you. But ultimately, the process, the outcome is having educated these students as best you can on this particular topic in the way that you see fit. There's a huge amount of autonomy there, and that's scary because there's a lot of responsibility.
Yeah, that's right.
But it's so much more satisfying.
I think satisfaction is very connected to responsibility as a whole, and I think having the academic freedom to to have the freedom to do whatever you want in class, still of course in the borders of what's acceptable, but being able to organize activities or teach the way you want to teach is something that Mart also touched on, and I think every teacher really who loves his job kind of appreciates that part of it. But
I like it more and more also because I'm finding over the years I've found what I like doing, and I've managed to do more of that. So I actually quite I like teaching tools. Like I haven't done it for that long yet, but I like it because it's very immediate. Like someone says, I don't know how to do this, and we figure it out together, and then they do know how to do it. And that's really satisfying. But also I teach medialism at the moment, which is a minor that we have, where I'm a coach helping very small groups of like 3 to 4 students make documentaries. And it's their creative project. They take a whole semester to make a documentary. They come up with their own idea. They make it, they learn how to film, they go out there, film it, they edit it, and I come in and talk with them about it and help them, solve issues, bounce ideas back and forth. And it's the most satisfying and fun thing ever. Like, I absolutely love doing it. And
what is your role as a teacher in that class? I mean...
I'm just coaching. So we sit in the studio. We have these studios at Hanze.
Yeah.
They sit in there. We first make out a plan for the idea of the documentary. Like, okay, so what's the creative idea? What's the message you're going through here? So it's the communication
and you
side,
guide them through that process
but it's them, right? I don't tell them what to do, but I guide them, as you say. I never go with them for filming. I don't go, like some of them have gone to other countries, and it would have been fantastic for me to go with them, like, to Namibia and Gambia. Like, I've had groups who've gone to those places, and I would have loved the adventure of going with them, but it's their project. Right? Okay. They're doing it. I don't get involved.
Which year students are you teaching in that course?
It's a minor that we offer, so it's third year.
Okay.
So if you were to, for example, not study abroad, you could do that.
Do the minor.
But it's also, when you study abroad, we get students in exchange, and they often do this.
Right.
And it's just, it's so fantastic. It's, so I found that I like doing that, and so I'm happy to do more of that. Some things are more like hard work. Some things are less fun to teach, but are important to teach, and I just got to do it. But I don't find the topic so interesting.
As long as you have something to balance the boring parts and the fun parts, I think you'll be fine. Okay, well we've gone over an hour, and I hate to keep you waiting, so I just have one last question to ask. When I was at your comedy night, I don't remember which day it was, but it was very fun. I really enjoyed it. It was amazing. The beer at that bar is amazing as well.
Martinez?
I was there. It was a great experience. But I saw that at a certain point during the show, I don't know what really happened. Maybe you can fill me in. But you brought this girl on the stage.
Yeah.
And to me, she didn't look like she was a part of your group, because she was extremely scared she had like stage fright, and she was almost shaking in front of the audience. And my question was that, maybe you can explain the situation, but my general question is, what do you say to the people who are really, really afraid to stand in front of people who are watching them and judging them in a certain way?
Okay, so these Monday night shows, like the one you went to, are a jam. They're an improv comedy jam that we host. So it's not so much, it feels like a show, but it's not a show by us. We decide what games we're going to play. We make sure the games are relatively easy to understand the concept of, and that there's no kind of like, more complicated skill that you need to make sure it runs well. And then for every game, we allow anyone in the audience to volunteer to join us and do it. And then so one of us will play and someone from the audience.
So did she do it because she wanted to kind of conquer that fear?
I don't know. I didn't ask her about it, but she presumably was a volunteer. I don't remember the exact person you're talking about, but we never force anyone to come play on stage. We would never do that. It's always volunteers. And some people are already taking the improv course that Case and Thomas teach at USFA, so they are trying to, put what they're learning into practice. Other people are just there for the first time, like, you know what, I'm going to do this. And people have their different reasons for doing it. But to get to your question, which is what would you say to people who are afraid to go and do it?
I think everybody's afraid, but certain people just really are terrified, petrified of it.
Well, look, you've got to work through the process in your own way. But I can say that for me, jumping in at the deep end of the pool, as it were, can sometimes work quite well.
Without knowing how to swim.
Yeah, it doesn't always work. And you know what? You might find yourself feeling very embarrassed or ashamed because you went up in front of an audience and you weren't yet good at doing what you were trying to do. But the idea is that these Mondays are a safe environment, and everybody knows that these are volunteers. Nobody's expecting you to be like a genius at this yet. And you know what? Like, try. Like, if things scare you, it can be good to try them. Right? I can't apply that in everything in life. Like, I've never bungee jumped, and the idea freaks me out.
Would you do it though if you had an opportunity?
I wonder now. Maybe I would. I'm not sure.
I think
because I do in principle. But again, through improv, I've got this principle for myself now where, generally on a more simple level than bungee jumping, if something in my head is blocking it, like I'm trying to avoid doing a thing because it worries me or scares me, and I realize that that's what's happening, that's the moment to confront it and do it. And
that's a good advice.
And that's going on stage unprepared, right? That's one of those things. But you know, I try to apply that more in terms of things that are kind of more, you know, in my personal life or something, you know, rather than I'm going to jump out of a plane now. But you know, you could apply it to that as well.
Yeah.
It doesn't always work. It's not always possible to do that. But as a general guiding principle, I sometimes try as much as I can to do it. But no, you know what? Yeah, go on stage. People are there. They're supporting the fact that you're doing it. If you're doing it in one of our shows, there's always, you know, we never make volunteers play scenes by themselves. Obviously, there's always us with a volunteer.
And you can always jump in and continue the narrative, kind of take it away from their hands if they're getting stuck a little bit.
Right. We know how to support what you're doing. We know how to do improv in a way that gives you space to do your thing, and we'll provide the structure. And tip number one, the biggest tip ever in improv, especially if you're coming on stage for the first time doing this. Don't try to be funny. Trying to be funny doesn't work. The goal is not to be funny, even though we call it improv comedy. The goal is to listen, respond, and to just try and drop your barriers and just do things. You know, if the person opposite you is a monster, you know, playing a monster, or you know, something scary. What would you do in that situation? Act scared. Okay, so act scared now, right? It's as simple as that. Respond to what the other person is doing. The funny will happen through the situation. The situations are going to become stupid anyway. And if something pops into your head that happens to be hilarious, say it. But no one's expecting you. You know, it's not, okay, now we have a volunteer who's going to do stand-up comedy without having prepared it. Now go, tell us the best jokes you can think of. That's not how it works.
Yeah,
that's not what we're doing.
There's this silence and you have to come up with something.
No, that's not what we're doing. So, you know, if you're not ready to do it, if you don't want to do it, no one's forcing you to do it. If something inside you is telling you, like, I'm super scared, but I'm curious what would happen, maybe see what happens. Yeah.
Beautiful. That's a beautiful advice from Tom. Thank you so much for having this conversation.
Thanks for asking me. It was a pleasure.
Thank you.